Everyone always said I was lucky, that I had the kind of marriage people dream about. Stable, elegant, picture perfect. I used to believe that too. I mean, I talked about him like he was some kind of legend. Brilliant at work, calm at home, charming in public. He had this presence that made people lean in, and I leaned in harder than anyone. I thought admiring him was love. I thought being proud of him meant we were strong. He never shared much about work, but I didn't ask too many questions. He said things like, "It's complicated," or "You wouldn't want the stress," and I let that be enough. I didn't see it as hiding. I saw it as him protecting me from the weight of his world. My role, I believed, was to support, not to pry. I'd set the table, pour the coffee, and smile across it like everything was fine. That's what a good wife does, right? But that morning, something shifted. I didn't say anything accusatory, nothing dramatic. Just one soft question. How's work? It was the kind of thing I'd asked 100 times, gently, curiously. I wasn't prepared for what came next. I wasn't even finished buttering my toast when it happened. And suddenly, my version of reality cracked, fast, loud, and hot. He didn't yell right away. It was the silence, the pause, like he was calculating something ugly. Then, a splash. Scalding coffee right across my face. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. He leaned in, his voice sharp like broken glass. "Mind your own business." I blinked, stunned, dripping. The coffee stung, but not as much as the silence that followed. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything back. I just sat there, soaked and stunned, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My cheek burned, but it was the cold unraveling inside me that scared me more. I waited for him to apologize, or at least to look sorry. But he didn't. He just grabbed his keys, muttered something about a meeting, and walked out like nothing had happened. Like I was nothing. The house felt different after he left. Too quiet, too clean. I stood in the kitchen, the coffee dripping down my blouse, thinking, no, hoping, maybe he'd call. Maybe say he lost his temper. Maybe explain. But my phone stayed silent, like it was part of some unspoken pact now. And that silence, it echoed louder than any scream. I kept hearing his words over and over. Mind your own business. Wasn't it our business? That night, I scrubbed the table a little harder than usual. Not because it was dirty, it wasn't, but because I needed to do something. Anything. The routine was all I had. The chopping, the folding, the wiping. It had always brought me peace before. But this time, my hands moved like I was trying to erase something. And the worst part? I still set a plate for him, still waited to hear his car pull in. Habit is a cruel comfort. When he did come home, hours later, I watched him closely. He didn't mention the morning, didn't glance at me long enough to acknowledge it. He just turned on the TV, asked what was for dinner, and leaned back like the world was fine, and I played along. I nodded, served his plate, and smiled like everything was still intact. But inside, something had shifted. Something had cracked. And I couldn't unhear that sound. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling like it had answers written on it. He was beside me, snoring softly, one arm flung over the pillow like nothing had changed. I kept waiting for the guilt to hit him, for some late-night whisper of regret. But nothing came. Just the sound of the fan spinning overhead and my thoughts racing in circles I didn't want to follow. That moment at breakfast wouldn't let go. I thought back to all the times I'd defended him. The raised eyebrows from friends, the awkward silences at dinner parties when he didn't show up, the tiny humiliations I'd brushed aside. He's just tired, I'd say. Work's been rough. But now I was starting to see the pattern, not just in his behavior, but in mine. How often had I mistaken distance for mystery? Coldness for strength? Silence for peace? And that silence, it was everywhere now. In the way he walked past me. In the way he left his phone face down. In the way he never asked me how I was. I started realizing I didn't know what kind of man I was married to. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to face it. Maybe the illusion was easier to live with than the truth. Until now. Until that damn cup of coffee woke something up inside me I didn't know was asleep. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. But something in me hardened. Not out of anger, not yet, but out of clarity. I'd built my life around a version of him that maybe never existed. And if that version had shattered in one morning, maybe it was time I stopped trying to glue it back together. Maybe it was time I stopped being the perfect wife and started asking the imperfect questions, starting with, what else don't I know? The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. No apology, no awkward glance, not even a casual, sorry about yesterday. Just silence, again, only colder now, sharper. He poured his coffee without looking at me, and all I could think was how easy it seemed for him to erase things. Like emotions were switches he could flip off when inconvenient, like I was something he could turn off. And I let him. I went through the motions, but I wasn't present. I cooked, I smiled, I nodded. But inside, I was unraveling everything. Every word, every look, every late-night phone call he said was work. And the more I thought, the more I realized I'd been ignoring the signs. The little jabs disguised as jokes, the unexplained expenses, the business trips that always seemed to happen when I needed him most. I thought I was being supportive, but I was being erased. That night, I didn't reach for routine. I reached for facts. I waited until he fell asleep, deep and careless like always, and I crept downstairs to his office. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just something that would help me understand the man I shared a bed with. I opened drawers, clicked through folders on his computer. The deeper I went, the more everything started to smell like a lie, like rot just beneath the surface. There were receipts for restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges in cities he never told me he visited, 2 cell phones, one I'd never seen before, tucked inside his briefcase like a secret waiting to be discovered. I sat there in the dark, holding the second phone in my hand, my heart pounding like I'd just stolen something. But it wasn't theft. It was recovery, of time, of truth, of myself, and I wasn't stopping there. I spent hours going through that phone. There were no calls, just encrypted apps and a locked photo gallery. But the texts, they were there. Names I didn't recognize, conversations in fragments, just enough to make my stomach turn. Transfers, codes, flight details, not love affairs, something worse. This wasn't about infidelity anymore. This was about deception with a dollar sign. And suddenly, my home felt like a crime scene. I opened the banking app next, mine and his. I used to joke that I let him handle the money because math gave me migraines. But now, it felt like a language I had to learn, fast. The accounts were scattered, multiple names, withdrawals and patterns that made no sense until I looked closer. Offshore transfers, round amounts, and one account I didn't even know existed, in my name. My hands shook as I clicked through it. At first, I wanted to believe it was business, legitimate, maybe some tax strategy I wasn't smart enough to follow. But no, the paper trail smelled of fear, rushed, hidden, deliberate. He wasn't just lying to me, he was using me. I stared at the screen, feeling like I'd been cast in a role I never auditioned for, the clueless wife in someone else's scheme. But I wasn't going to stay clueless. That version of me ended the morning he threw coffee in my face. So I started writing things down. Every receipt, every timestamp, every discrepancy. I made copies, backups, sent files to an old email I hadn't used in years, just in case. I didn't know who to trust yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to confront him blindly. He told me to stay out of his business. So I made it my mission to get into it, all of it, piece by piece, until the whole story was mine. Over the next few days, I became someone else, or maybe I just became me, without the blindfold. I moved through the house like a ghost with a mission. While he scrolled through his phone on the couch, I memorized his passwords and reflections. While he showered, I scanned paperwork like a detective searching for motive. I was quiet, calm, pleasant, and watching everything. Every lie he breathed became data. Every careless move, a breadcrumb. He didn't notice. That was the part that stung the most. Not the betrayal, not even the secrets, but how little effort it took to deceive me. He was so sure I'd never look deeper, so sure I'd stay polite, smiling, grateful. That's the story he'd written for me, and for years I played it perfectly. But now I was reading between the lines, and what I saw wasn't just dishonesty, it was danger. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a witness. I started taking late-night walks, or at least that's what I told him. In truth, I was driving around the neighborhood just to breathe, to think, to keep my rage from boiling over. It's funny how silence changes color when you stop fearing it. It becomes focus, power. He thought I was quiet because I was scared, but I was quiet because I was planning. And the more I saw, the more I knew. This wasn't just about me. He was hurting people I didn't even know. That's when I stopped asking questions. There was no need. I already had more answers than I wanted. I wasn't sure what I was building yet. A case, a trap, an escape. But it was forming, one screenshot at a time. And soon, I'd need help. Real help. I just had to find the right person to trust with everything I now carried. And I had to do it before he noticed the silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. I didn't even know where to start. I had all this evidence, the receipts, the account statements, the messages, but no idea how to make sense of it legally. Emotionally, it was clear. He'd betrayed me. But legally, I needed someone who could read between the numbers the way I'd learned to read between his lies. So I searched, carefully, anonymously. I found a name buried in a forum thread, someone with a reputation for digging deep. Her name was Marla, and she didn't work out of a shiny office. She met me at a diner, neutral ground, safe. I showed up early, hands sweaty, heart hammering in my chest. I'd never done anything like this before. I wasn't the kind of woman who had a contact. But when she walked in, all confidence and sharp eyes, I knew I'd found the right one. She ordered black coffee and said, "Tell me why you're here. Don't leave anything out." So I told her. I laid it all out, not like a victim, but like a woman who was done pretending. She didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, just listened and took notes. When I handed over the folder I'd compiled, she gave a low whistle. "This is more than marital trouble," she said. "This is criminal. And if you're right, someone out there already suspects it too." That's when I realized I wasn't just exposing a man. I might be exposing an entire machine. Marla made a call. A man named Harris picked up. "Federal," she said. "Financial Crimes Division." I didn't say a word. She spoke on my behalf, careful, vague, but firm. When she hung up, she looked at me with something close to respect. "He's already on their radar," she said. "But what you have, it's the thread they've been trying to pull for months." I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or terrified, maybe both. After that meeting, something shifted in me again. It wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. I had a mission. And now, I had people behind me. Real people. People who knew how to follow the money, how to build a case, how to take someone like him down. But here's the tricky part. I had to go back home and keep playing the role. Smile. Cook. Ask nothing. React to nothing. It was the hardest acting job of my life. He noticed I was quieter, but not in a way that made him suspicious. Just pleased. He liked me small, contained. If anything, he thought the coffee incident had put me back in line. He was kinder, strangely enough, offered to take me to dinner, asked if I wanted anything from the store, as if kindness now could patch over what had shattered. I nodded along, heart steady, face soft. All the while, I was planting bombs under his empire. Every evening, after he fell asleep, I worked. I cataloged things I hadn't noticed before. Call logs, business partners' names, timestamps on receipts that didn't line up. I cross-referenced everything, created spreadsheets, logged voice memos. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice and safety. Because the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just some midlife affair or financial mess. This was calculated, dangerous, and far-reaching. Marla called every 2 days. We spoke in code. She said things like, "The garden looks good," when the investigation was progressing, or "The weather's stormy," when new files needed redacting. It became our language, the language of women who'd seen too much and stayed quiet too long. I wasn't alone anymore. And with every update, I realized I wasn't helping them build the case. I was the case, the missing link. There was a moment, one night, when I watched him sleep and felt this strange grief. Not because I still loved him. I didn't. That part of me had burned out in the kitchen with the sting of coffee and the echo of his cruelty, but because I finally saw him for who he truly was. And it hurt to admit I'd built my life around someone who only loved himself. He wasn't my partner. He was my project, my mistake, and now, my undoing. The files I'd gathered were damning. Offshore accounts, fake shell companies, client data that didn't add up. Marla said federal agents were stunned, not just by the depth of his crimes, but by the neat little package I'd tied together for them. She laughed once and said, "You've done more damage in 2 weeks than we did in 6 months. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of something quieter, like breathing after being underwater. Still, I couldn't let it show. At home, I played the part. I asked about his day. I kissed his cheek. I folded his laundry with hands that had touched secrets he didn't know were out. It was surreal, like sharing a house with a ghost who didn't know he was dead yet. But that's the thing about lies. Eventually, they run out of places to hide. And I'd mapped out every corner, every shadow, every crack. By the end of that week, Marla told me to be ready. "They're moving soon," she said, "and you need to act like it's just another day." I nodded. I could do that. I had become a master of silence, not the silence of submission, but of strategy. He had built a wall of secrets, and I had walked in with a blueprint of the cracks. It was a Thursday. Nothing remarkable about it on the surface. The sky was overcast, the house smelled faintly of toast and printer ink, and I was folding laundry like any other day. But inside, I was on high alert. My heart wasn't racing. It was slow, steady, deliberate. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. Today wasn't just another page in his calendar. It was the chapter where everything unraveled. He walked in just after 6, like always. Same smug smile, same loosened tie, same "what's for dinner" voice. I watched him drop his keys into the bowl by the door, completely unaware that those would be the last keys he ever touched freely. He kissed the top of my head, and I smiled. Polite, sweet, poisonous. I asked about his day. He lied, of course. Said it was boring, same as usual. He had no idea that boring was about to explode. I heard the tires before I saw them. Slow, intentional, the kind of sound that makes the hairs on your neck stand up even when you don't know why. I moved to the window as casually as I could. Black sedan, tinted windows, government quiet. 2 men stepped out, dressed like neutrality itself. Dark suits, no expression. One checked a folder. The other scanned the house. They weren't here for a visit. They were here for a reckoning. I stayed in the kitchen as they rang the bell. I didn't want to miss a single second. He opened the door with that practiced confidence, the same one he used with clients, servers, anyone he thought was beneath him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice all charm. They asked for him by name, full name. His smile twitched. He glanced back at me. I just kept stirring the soup. Calm, measured, completely untouchable. One of the agents held up a badge. The other read him his rights. And just like that, the living room, the same place where we'd once decorated a Christmas tree and danced to Sinatra, turned into a crime scene. His voice rose quickly, high and defensive. "There's been a mistake," he snapped. "You can't just show up here without a warrant." But they had one. Thick, official, full of words I'd come to understand far too well. He looked back at me then. Really looked. And something flickered behind his eyes. Panic, betrayal, maybe even realization. For a second, I thought he might say my name, accuse me, plead with me. But he didn't. He just stood there, frozen, as they told him to put his hands behind his back. He hesitated. They didn't. They moved like they'd done this before. Clean, precise, no wasted energy. The way justice should look. I followed them to the doorway, barefoot, quiet. He tried to twist toward me, to say something. Maybe a last word, a question, a curse. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just looked him straight in the eye, then gently, reached for the door and closed it. That was the moment I let go. Of the past. Of the stories I told myself. Of the illusion I clung to like it meant safety. It never did. Behind that door, my heart pounded like it hadn't in years. But it wasn't fear this time. It was something bigger, bolder. Like I'd just stepped out of someone else's skin and remembered who I was underneath. He threw coffee at a woman. He tried to break her down with silence and control. But in the end, I threw his entire life into the hands of federal agents. And I did it without ever raising my voice. The silence after the door closed was deafening, but not in the way it used to be. It wasn't heavy or cruel anymore. It was clean, clear, honest. I stood there for a moment, just listening to the absence of him. No footsteps, no sighs, no muttered lies floating through the hallway. Just me, in my own home, for the first time in what felt like years. The walls didn't feel tight anymore. They felt like they'd exhaled. Neighbors peeked through blinds. A car slowed down out front. I didn't care. Let them see. Let them whisper. Let them wonder what the hell happened behind our perfect front door. I owed no one an explanation. Not anymore. For years I protected his image like it was sacred. Now I watched it fall apart like it deserved to. And all I did was turn off the stove, pour myself a glass of water, and sit down. Not to cry, not to celebrate, just to be. I stared at my hands for a long time. Not because I doubted anything, but because they didn't look like the hands of someone who had just detonated a life. They looked steady, soft, familiar. But inside them was a strength I hadn't acknowledged before, the strength to survive a lie, to expose it, to walk through fire without making a sound. He thought I was silent because I was weak, but silence in the right hands becomes power. And that power, it wasn't finished yet. Because after the arrest comes the trial. After the trial comes the truth, the headlines, the scrutiny, and maybe the freedom. But I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I was chasing clarity, peace. And as I sat there, letting the weight of it all settle in, I realized something. Justice had walked through my front door in polished shoes, but I had let it in. The news broke within 48 hours. First the local station, then the regional outlets, then national. His face was everywhere. Mugshot, press photos, even that polished headshot I used to frame above the fireplace. Now it was tagged under headlines like white-collar criminal exposed by wife and elite consultant at center of federal fraud case. Every time I saw his name, it felt distant, like a ghost that no longer belonged to me. Reporters tried to find me. They parked outside the house, slipped notes in the mailbox. Some knocked on the door, hoping for a quote, a breakdown, a confession. But I gave them nothing. Not because I was hiding, but because I had already said everything I needed to say in the silence that brought him down. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a podium. Let them guess. Let them speculate. The facts would speak louder than I ever could. Friends reached out. The real ones anyway. Some sent flowers. Some sent questions they were too polite to phrase directly. Are you okay? Did you know? Why didn't you leave? And I answered when I felt like it, but most of the time I just thanked them and went back to reading or planting something in the garden. Because that's what healing looked like for me. Small, quiet things. No statements, no interviews, just space. Funny how the same people who once envied my marriage now looked at me like I'd risen from the dead. Maybe I had. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Like the part of me that kept shrinking to fit his life had finally stretched back into itself. I wasn't the woman behind the man anymore. I was the woman who dismantled him. With truth, with proof, and with the kind of patience most people mistake for weakness. Filing for divorce was strangely uneventful. No arguments, no drawn-out courtroom scenes. Most of the assets were already in my name, not because I planned it that way, but because he trusted me to be docile, to not question, not challenge, just sign where he pointed. Funny how that worked out. The same silence he weaponized against me became my legal leverage. And when it was all finalized, I didn't cry. I felt weightless. There was one account he forgot about, or maybe thought I wouldn't touch. A small one, in an offshore bank, linked back to a foundation he never mentioned. I froze it, donated half of it to a women's shelter downtown. They didn't ask questions, just thanked me, like they knew that money came from something dark. I stood outside afterward, watching women enter the building, bruised, quiet, but alive. And I thought, this is what rebuilding looks like. I didn't need to torch his memory. I didn't go online to tell my story or post inspirational quotes about survival. I let people think what they wanted. What mattered was this. I wasn't living in reaction to him anymore. I wasn't keeping up an image or managing damage or waiting to be hit with the next storm. The storm was gone. I was standing in the aftermath, yes, but I was standing. And the ground beneath me felt solid for once. Every morning I found a new ritual, not for closure, but for claiming space. Watering plants, stretching on the patio. Sitting in silence with a book, no noise but the birds and the slow hum of a world that didn't need me to prove anything anymore. I didn't need noise. I didn't need applause. My peace wasn't loud. It was mine. Fully mine. The cafe was nothing special. Just a corner spot with chipped mugs and the kind of coffee that's never quite hot enough. But I loved it. Not for the menu, for the anonymity. For the way no one looked twice when I walked in, hair up, cardigan sleeves pushed past my elbows. I chose the seat by the window, the one that caught morning light. The waitress didn't recognize me from the news, or if she did, she didn't care. Either way, it was perfect. I ordered my usual, sat back, watched the world pass by without me needing to explain a thing. A few tables over, two women were laughing about something small, a recipe maybe, or a bad date. And I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for the next disaster, not for his next lie, not even for closure. I had it. Not in a dramatic confrontation or a viral headline, but in the stillness of this moment. This sip. This life that was mine again. There was something poetic about it, really. That it all started with a cup of coffee, thrown in anger, meant to humiliate me. And now here I was, lifting another cup to my lips, calm, alone, unshaken. He thought he was silencing me that morning, but all he did was wake up a part of me that had been buried beneath years of smiling and saying, "It's fine." It wasn't fine, and I wasn't invisible, not anymore. He once told me to mind my own business, and I did. I made sure he had none left.